Over the last year, Panorama has reported on a series of major investigations. We revealed how, during the Dirty War in Northern Ireland, British spies had colluded with loyalist murder gangs in assassinations of IRA suspects.
Brigadier Kerr. Yeah, good morning. John Ware is my name, from the BBC Panorama programme. Hello, John.
Tonight, a new twist to that story. Damning new revelations from a top British spy in the IRA against the man who went on to become Northern Ireland's Minister of Education, Martin McGuinness. We also exposed a major food scandal, how some chicken processing companies are squeezing profits out of a product that isn't, well, all chicken.
This is the perfect crime, and it's not even a crime.
Now the Food Standards Agency has recommended a ban on using beef and pork extracts in a process which fills chicken with water to make it bigger than it really is. Another health regulator failed to monitor the sometimes deadly effects of a popular antidepressant.
I wanted to sit in front of a mirror and watch myself bleed to death.
Tonight, is the drug still safe? The latest response from the manufacturer. We also exposed how horse racing was rife with corruption.
I promise you, if you read the transcript.
I've got the transcript here.
It was a very transcript here.
Since then, the racing industry has acknowledged we gave them a wake-up call. And on his final day in office, the UN's chief weapons inspector tells Panorama Mr. Blair and his staff did not analyze the intelligence thoroughly enough before committing us to war.
The British document and dossier spoke about 45 minutes, and that is highly doubtful.
Highly doubtful.
Tonight, we report on the latest developments following Panorama's investigations. Last summer, Panorama investigated the secret intelligence war against Irish terrorism. We revealed how members of the British intelligence services used loyalist murder gangs to assassinate those they suspected were in the IRA. One of the targets was the Catholic solicitor Pat Finucane. His murder was one of the most controversial of the Troubles.
I remember sitting at the kitchen table, eating dinner.
Lovely jubbly, General Electric come. Have you got it, John?
There was a bang from the hallway. My father jumped up. He slammed the door shut. At that point, my memory blanks. But the thing I remember most is the noise.
Over 6 months, we secretly recorded this gunman, Ken Barrett. He told us, remarkably, that RUC police officers had urged his loyalist murder gang to shoot Pat Finucane.
Would Finucane have been a target if this feedback hadn't reached you, do you think?
To be honest, Finucane would have been laid to death if Peterson.
Say that again?
Finucane would have been laid to death
If the
if
Peters
hadn't interfered.
hadn't interfered, yeah. Do you reckon? Do you think you'd have got round to it anyway?
No. Well, solicitors were kind of like taboo. Like we used a lot of Roman Catholic solicitors ourselves. They were kind of like taboo at the time. Like you didn't touch them. Do you understand me? Because they come in and see us and all that. They were off limits. They were off limits.
Last month, Barrett himself was charged with the Finucane murder after an undercover operation by the Metropolitan Police. We also disclosed how the man who helped set up Finucane's assassination was an undercover British agent, Brian Nelson. He was working for a secret intelligence unit within the British Army. The murdered solicitor was not the only person Nelson fingered for assassination. According to Secret Army records, Nelson, also known as Agent 6137, was tasked to help make targeting by loyalist murder gangs more professional. In Instead of them shooting innocent Catholics, Nelson's job was to ensure the proper targeting of provisional IRA members prior to any shooting. For 14 years, Sir John Stevens has been investigating collusion between the security forces and loyalist killers. 3 months ago, he published his third inquiry. The Met Commissioner's conclusions, like Panorama's, were damning.
We have identified serious shortcomings highlighting collusion and the extreme of security force agents being involved in murder.
Are we likely to see charges in respect of members of the security forces?
That's a possibility. That would be a matter for the Director of Public Prosecutions, and I would think that he probably will involve the Attorney General in that.
Can you say how many files in respect of members of the security forces you have submitted to the Director for consideration?
Been a large number of files, and those files are still going in as I speak now.
Stevens discovered that in the dirty war against terrorism, loyalist murder gangs had been awash with British agents, and that the lives of many more Catholics could have been saved had this intelligence been properly acted upon.
What can happen in any agency, including this one, is you can actually become obsessed with intelligence, obsessed with information, because it's power. But the real importance is changing that intelligence and information into evidence to ensure that those people who are murdering, blowing people to bits, are actually arrested, and just as importantly, far more importantly as that, are convicted by the courts.
But it wasn't just loyalists who the intelligence services were manipulating. The Stevens inquiry is also investigating the role of one of Britain's most important agents at the top of the IRA, codenamed Steak Knife. In May, Steak Knife was alleged to be this man, a Belfast builder, Freddie Scappaticci. Scap, as he's known, went public to strenuously deny he'd ever been a spy.
Why do you think this label of Steak Knife has been attached to you?
I don't know.
Tonight we can confirm that Freddie Scappaticci's denial is all bluff. He was Steak Knife, and he was paid around £10,000 a year by the British, and has been set up with a retirement fund worth about £250,000. Back in the 80s, Scappaticci was second in command of the IRA's security department, otherwise known as the Nutting Squad. His job? To hunt down British spies within the IRA, and there were plenty of them, though obviously none of these spies knew who the other spies were. In the 1980s, the commander of an IRA assassination unit told Freddie Scappaticci he suspected that one of his men was a British agent, which was a bit rich because the commander was himself a British agent. Indeed, every member of his unit were British agents, though none, of course, as important as Freddie Scappaticci. The suspect agent was later executed, one of about 20 British agents shot while Scappaticci was the IRA's spycatcher. The Stevens inquiry is now investigating this gravest of charges, whether these British agents were sacrificed by the intelligence services to protect the cover of one of their top agents, Steak Knife. But as Stevens digs deeper into the dirty war, much of the dirt is also landing on the IRA.
James Martin McGuinness.
The Cook Report was an expose of Martin McGuinness as an IRA godfather.
Such an evil man.
Afterwards, Scappaticci telephoned the program makers out of the blue and asked for a meeting. So they did meet twice, their first meeting here in the car park of this Belfast hotel. All they knew was that he was an IRA man. Of course, they didn't know he was the Army's top agent, Steak Knife. And Steak Knife didn't know they were taping him. We've got hold of the transcripts of those two meetings in which Scappaticci says the program on McGuinness could have been harder hitting.
Oh, I know him very well.
He's the Northern Command OC. He's also on the Army Council.
McGuinness, once Northern Commander of the IRA, more recently was Minister of Education in Northern Ireland. In Scappaticci's role as IRA spy catcher, he reported regularly to the IRA's High Command. Of course, Scappaticci was also reporting everything back secretly to the British. This transcript of his recorded conversation illustrates the sort of thing he was saying about McGuinness.
Nothing happens in the Northern Command that McGuinness doesn't okay, and I mean nothing. If you look at every British soldier shot, every policeman shot, every booby trap or whatever, McGuinness is ultimately responsible for all of it. It's all under his control. He's a type of person you don't get side by side with. He doesn't have friends within the IRA. He has what he calls comrades. He frowns on womanizing, he frowns on drinking. A very moralistic person.
The secret recording of Scappaticci sheds dramatic new light on one particularly inglorious episode from McGuinness's IRA past. It concerns Frank Hegarty, an agent who worked for the same secret British Army unit that ran Freddie Scappaticci. Hegarty revealed to the British the location of major IRA arms dumps, but his cover was blown and he fled to England. There he got homesick, frequently phoning his elderly mother Rose at her home in Derry. Martin McGuinness was determined to get Hegarty back to Derry. So McGuinness ingratiated himself with Hegarty's mother to persuade her to get her son home, where he said all would be forgiven.
He befriended her. He, as I understand it, he ate in the house. Meals prepared by the Hegarty family. He basically, Martin McGuinness sold himself to the Hegarty family. Trust is the key word. Martin portrayed himself as a friend. I'm someone who can deliver. Yes, you can trust the IRA. No harm will come to your son. He just has to come back. He just has to talk to a couple of people, and he'll know one of them, and everything will be fine.
Finally, after 3 months, Hegarty agreed to come home. McGuinness then persuaded him to cross the border for what McGuinness suggested would be a friendly IRA debrief. At 9:30 p.m., 2 of Hegarty's relatives reluctantly drove him to the Donegal border town of Buncrana. From there, he was driven to a secret location. Remember Martin McGuinness's final words of reassurance to Frank Hegarty that when he got across the border to his debrief here in Donegal, there to meet him would be a familiar face. According to Scappaticci, Martin McGuinness was waiting for him, along with 2 other members of the IRA's ruling Army Council.
McGuinness was part of the Army Council who first interrogated Hegarty, court-martialed him, and then ordered him to be shot. Court-martialed because he was an IRA volunteer. He threw himself on the mercy of the Army Council. They went into another room, said no, take him out and give it to him. A bullet in the back of the head. It's not important who pulled the trigger. McGuinness wouldn't dirty his hands with that.
Tonight, Martin McGuinness said Panorama had made a scandalous attack on his character, and there was no basis in fact for the allegations. However, evidence of how McGuinness had lured Frank Hegarty back to his death came from his mother, Rose Hegarty. At the time, McGuinness described her as a confused old woman. But in his tape conversations, Scappaticci said her evidence had been truthful.
See, that woman was right in what she was saying. Like, he is an evil person. McGuinness got on the phone and says, come back, you'll be okay, blah, blah, blah. Convinced him he'd be okay. Convinced the mother. And you think life is sweet when those assurances come from the top man, Martin McGuinness? He gave his word of honour. I know what I'm talking about, right?
I don't think an elderly lady is going to make up stories about Martin McGuinness. And Martin McGuinness may be the Minister of Education, but the fact is that this old lady had no reason to lie about her son.
If Scappaticci knew Hegarty's fate, so almost certainly did his British Army handlers. It seems though they did nothing to warn him or prevent the execution of this British agent. Perhaps the biggest mystery is why Scappaticci has not himself been executed by the IRA. Military intelligence reports show that from time to time he was suspected of being a British agent, until finally in 1990 he was eased out of the IRA. Scappaticci intimated as much when secretly recorded 3 years later.
For a long time I was at the heart of things. I'm no longer at the heart of things, right? I haven't been for 2 or 3 years, right?
How then has the IRA spy catcher escaped the fate that he himself dished out to fellow spies? Publicly, the IRA leadership has given Scappaticci the benefit of the doubt.
What we are dealing with is unsourced, unsubstantiated accusation. No proof has been brought forward on any of it.
Tonight, through his lawyer, Freddie Scappaticci denied implicating Martin McGuinness and questioned the authenticity of the tapes. The IRA leadership, however, may have difficulty in continuing to deny that under their watch they were penetrated at the top, and not just by Scappaticci. I understand there were other spies of similar rank whose dealings in Britain's dirty war have yet to be revealed. Last October, Andy Davis brought us the result of a 9-month investigation into corruption in horse racing.
This is a story about one of the biggest scandals in the history of British sport.
For the everyday punters having a bet in the race, they have no chance.
It's a story about race fixing, bribery, and bookies offering trainers secret deals.
Dear Mr. Fitzgerald, I would like to clarify the arrangement between us. I will arrange that an account be opened for you and you will place a £500 wager on any of your runners you select, etc., etc. This is clearly a no-lose betting account.
I haven't had an account like that, and don't be too smart with me.
I'm not being smart.
You're trying to be a bit smart.
Well, what do you think the average punter would make of such an arrangement?
I couldn't tell you what the average punter would make, but if you can prove that I ever had, then you can have all the money you want.
That looks about as conclusive proof as you can get.
Under-regulated for 40 years, the betting industry has been allowed to develop a culture of secret deals where the odds are stacked against the punter.
We revealed how former jockey Graham Bradley, one of the best horsemen of his generation, had close links with Brian Wright, a well-known major criminal.
Mr. Bradley, Andy Davis, Panorama.
Andy Davis?
That's right. I wanted to ask you, for how long were you being paid off by Brian Wright?
How long I was being paid off by Brian? That's a silly, awful question.
Well, you admitted that in court. You said that you were receiving a lot of money from Brian Wright for giving him privileged information. That's true, isn't it?
What I said in court, I don't retract because I wouldn't want to perjure myself, but it was a very broad spectrum. What are you doing here, actually? You haven't got permission from the racecourse to film here.
Sorry, who are you?
That's right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, if you courtesy to have asked the racecourse first.
Brian Wright was a race fixer. He got the inside track through paying jockeys and providing them with drugs and women. Roger Buffum blew the whistle on the organisation that ran racing, the Jockey Club. In charge of security there for 10 years.
I believe that racing is institutionally corrupt in some respects, and I believe that the Jockey Club falls short in regulation, in having the moral courage and resolve to deal with some of these problems.
We act when there is evidence. I don't recall a situation, I've been here a long time, I don't recall any situation where evidence was available to us and we didn't take action.
The Jockey Club and Roger Buffum parted company, but Buffum took with him some documents that were never meant to see the light of day. So we went to the High Court twice to make sure they did.
It has been made clear on behalf of the BBC that this case is not solely that the Jockey Club failed to take effective action, but also that if effective action cannot be taken, more effective means must be found to preserve the integrity of racing.
Publicly, the Jockey Club claimed to protect the interests of the racing public. Privately, well, that was a different matter. Bufham's successor as head of security, Major General Jeremy Phipps, was caught out when we secretly filmed him meeting up with Buffam. Phipps spoke candidly about Jockey Club members and their failures.
Apart from the odd warning,
Nothing's happened. No. Don't you think that's reprehensible?
and it's not just, it is actually the backbone that's not terribly gone.
You told him that the backbone of the Jockey Club isn't terribly strong.
I don't believe that was the case.
Those are your exact words.
Are they?
These are your comments, which are transcribed word for word from that meeting, which was recorded. Do you still think members of the Jockey Club are, and I quote you, fucking ignorant?
No, I didn't say that.
You did say that. You did say that. Roger Buffam says the club members, and you reply, they're fucking ignorant. And Roger Buffam says, who gets indignant? Do you think they're fucking ignorant?
One word with you. Actually, we can deal with this.
Sorry, John, these are legitimate questions.
They are, and you can ask them.
This is a matter of
Andy,
public interest.
Andy,
and I think
by all means, ask them in 1 minute. I just want one word with Jeremy.
General Phipps had been pulled up at the first hurdle, but the withdrawal was to be only temporary. It appeared that his PR director wanted to gently point out to him that he must have had a perfectly good reason to be quite so critical of the Jockey Club.
Can I ask you what your public relations officer just said to you?
Well, he reminded me why I met Roger Buffam to try and identify if indeed he was writing a book, if indeed he had been contacted by BBC and by newspapers. In order to draw everything out from him, I had to go along with some of the things that he had been talking about.
3 days after the programme, Jeremy Phipps resigned. During our investigation, the race fixer Brian Wright was on the run from drug smuggling charges. Although the Jockey Club had known what he'd been up to, they said they could do nothing while his associates were facing trial. Then last December, 2 months after the programme, the Jockey Club finally banned Wright from all its race courses. He is still on the run, however. And what of his chum, the noted jockey Graham Bradley? He's been disqualified from the racing world for 5 years and is appealing in the High Court. Another race fixer was ex-jockey Dermot Brown. He admitted doping horses and has been banned from racing for 20 years. Since our programme, the Jockey Club has said it will tighten up the industry and then hand over its historic role of regulation to a new independent body by 2005. Last week, the Jockey Club and the British Horse Racing Board unveiled their review of the industry, chaired by a former chief constable.
To see what evidence there is for...
While he didn't think corruption in racing was institutionalised, he did agree an overhaul of security was in order.
As far as Panorama is concerned, it provided an opportunity for people to take a long, hard look at this sport and this industry and say, is it corrupt? In short, the findings of this report are that racing in this country is broadly fair, well regulated. That doesn't mean that there isn't an indication that corrupt practices happen. They do. Panorama did racing a service in that sense because it was a wake-up call, as we've said in the report.
The government too backs the idea of a new body to regulate racing. But for now, the Jockey Club remains in charge. The public may only believe the radical changes that have been promised when they see them. Last May, we investigated a major food scandal that will literally make your mouth water. Chicken, a £1 billion industry, and the most popular meat in Britain. But, as reporter Betson Powers revealed, Some Dutch chicken is pumped so full of water, it needs a sort of glue to keep it from spilling out. A top Chinese chef showed us the difference between the top-grade chicken he used and its cheap relation.
There's 30% added water in this chicken. In unprocessed frozen chicken, it's more like 4%.
What's the difference between that chicken and the quality chicken that you do use?
That fish chicken, you can put it there and compare it. That's absolutely different, is it?
So what is this like when you slice it?
You can have a look and see what you think.
That's solid. You can feel the fibres too.
Yeah, that's right.
And compared to the other one?
And then compared to this one, you can smooth it and then like jellyfish, it's soft.
We posed as a company wanting to invest in the cheap chicken industry.
Pan Ventures.
By using insiders to conduct secret filming, we captured the evidence of some Dutch companies supplying frozen chicken to the United Kingdom.
The company is Pan Ventures.
Amsterdam, and it's the early shift from one of Panorama's undercover workers. For the past 6 months, we've been on the chicken run, investigating how some Dutch processors squeeze a little more profit out of their birds. You may have eaten some today, but this chicken's not all chicken, not quite. They pump it with water, so much water, some Dutch fillets end up like this.
This is the perfect crime, and it's not even a crime.
Some Dutch chicken processors add protein, sometimes beef or pork, to hold all the water in. Panorama asked a specialist lab to test some of this chicken our fake company had bought.
They tested 12 fillets of Dutch frozen chicken. Identigen found beef DNA in half of them.
How long have they been using beef and pork?
12 years.
Right.
But he insisted his clients had stopped using beef and pork. Now, they used only chicken.
Back in Holland, some food processors were using beef protein in chicken during the BSE crisis. Using these proteins in chicken isn't illegal, as long as hydrolyzed protein is listed on the label. But we secretly filmed one company which told us about their new protein product in which all telltale traces were removed, making DNA testing impossible.
That is what I meant with our special techniques. We can take off the DNA.
So when the FSA or whoever in the UK tests it?
Negative.
We wanted to know whether the food regulator knew about this new process.
We've had food safety experts asking why is it that it's up to journalists to find this out and not the Food Standards Agency? Surely it's your job.
Certainly it is something that the Food Standards Agency, if it were brought to our attention, would investigate. But we can't possibly be expected to, I personally can't possibly be expected to know every product that's on sale in every food manufacturer in the whole of the European Economic Community.
Before we could ask any more, and while the tape was being changed, the interview was suddenly cut short. A fortnight later, the Food Standards Agency agreed to finish it. Having had time to reflect, what will their response now be?
We can guarantee that we have tackled this problem and tackled it effectively. We can guarantee that we were the first agency even to find that this was a problem. We can guarantee that we've got European backing for tackling this problem Europe-wide.
You knew nothing about this, did you, until we told you a few weeks ago?
You have brought some things to our attention. We hope that you will provide evidence that you have gathered that we will then be able to investigate.
We gave the Food Standards Agency our test results. A month later, the FSA urged the European Commission to limit how much water can legally be added to chicken. It also called for a ban on injecting chicken with beef and pork protein to hold the water in. What happens next depends on the response of the EU. In January, Sarah Barclay brought home the reality for families caring for their severely disabled children.
In Oxfordshire, all services for disabled children are rationed. Even though they help more than many other councils, some of the most severely disabled children are being turned away or denied help they've been promised.
None of us asked for our children to be this way.
I just thought I had a perfectly normal baby until about 3.5 months when she had her first seizure.
She's a baby because she needs to be cared for in the way that a baby is, but she's a big girl with a little voice.
2 girls whom modern medicine helped survive. Now classmates whose parents are about to discover what happens when you ask for help, but you're no longer a priority.
Tussie and David Myerson's daughter Emmy has profound mental and physical disabilities. When she was a baby, her parents were told to put her into care, but they were determined to keep her at home.
Do you feel you've been penalised for having decided to look after her?
It was perhaps tougher still for Barbara Riley, a single mother. When we made the programme, she was trying to get extra foster care for her daughter Asia, who has cerebral palsy.
Indoors, please. Indoors. When was the last time you had a night off? Can't remember. No. How long am I going to be able to cope?
This was the day Barbara Riley learned how much foster care the council would fund for her.
It's going to be 1 night a month. That's all I'm going to get. What were you hoping for? A weekend.
It's the loneliest journey imaginable. Nothing can prepare you for how much you have to find.
After 11 years of trying to cope at home with just a few hours of care each week, the Myersons asked the council to fund a residential school place for Emmy. They were clearly at their wits' end.
Do you know how many times I've wished that she would just die so that I don't have to have these conversations anymore?
With so many competing demands on limited funds, for the council, it requires the judgment of Solomon.
If we make expensive placements, we have to be sure that that is the right way of meeting the needs for that child, because if we don't do that, if we don't take that time to make that consideration, then other families will miss out.
Now finally the council has decided it's not going to fund a residential school place for Emmy. But it is offering a new package, up to 25 hours of help a week. This is more than the Myersons have ever had, but nothing like enough, they say. A lawyer who contacted them after our programme now says legal action is likely.
We want to get the placement. We want to get them to fund the school. If doing it through the courts is the only way we can do it, then we will carry on until we've exhausted everything.
It's very difficult to describe. You wonder how loud you have to shout to get somebody to listen.
Asia, meanwhile, now spends 1 night a month with a foster family. Give me more of a break, says her mother Barbara. Sorry, say the council, that's your lot. Cases like these can be found all over the country. The government has been obsessed with improving the public services through setting targets, but not when it comes to disabled children. In their case, there are no specific targets. In 2 investigations about this antidepressant, Seroxat, Shelley Joffrey has reported the hidden side of the drug and exposed the failings of the drugs regulator. Our second programme in May was driven entirely by your reaction to the first.
There were 67,000 phone calls to the BBC helpline. Panorama received nearly 1,400 emails. We read all of them.
It's taken away the anxiety and the depression down to a point where I now feel more relaxed than I ever have done.
While Seroxat helps millions of people, for others, as your emails showed, the drug can have a terrible effect.
I attacked my daughter. I held her head in my hands and I was hitting her head on the floor.
On the fourth day of taking them, he was in possession of a hunting gun and he went to a local wood and shot himself.
Cigarette burns and there's sort of razor marks there as well.
It's strange to learn from a TV programme rather than your GP what these side effects were. I
thought, yes, brilliant, somebody's actually taking notice.
This is the drugs regulator, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. Its job is to monitor drug safety. And when we made the program, it considered that Seroxat was safe. Two experts we consulted considered the regulator was ignoring the evidence.
I defy any scientist, any good scientist, to look at the data that you accumulated and not conclude there is a problem.
We showed this was because the existing system of reporting those experiences was underused. Developed after the thalidomide scandal, it relies on GPs filling in a yellow card. It does not allow reports from patients.
You could take one view of this, which is the regulator is playing Russian roulette with people's lives. It's not listening to people, it's listening to selective evidence. It's not taking the real evidence, which is people's experiences.
So, with the help of Mind, the mental health charity, we developed our own yellow card drug reporting system.
So in spite of the stories that our viewers have told us, your views remain unchanged on this. You don't believe that Seroxat can, even in a small number of cases, provoke self-harm or suicide.
Tragic though these cases are, we do not believe that, I do not believe that Seroxat causes people to take their own lives or self-harm.
But the regulator is now listening to patients. After our first program in October, the government ordered a review of the group of antidepressants known as SSRIs, which includes popular drugs like Seroxat. It's assessing Panorama's yellow card reports.
The value of patient reports, as the Panorama program showed, is just phenomenal. It isn't just what the program has done in terms of understanding the effects of Seroxat and other drugs like it. It feels to me something much more to do with the role that patients play in the evaluation of medicines. I see it as a real watershed. The impact is only just beginning.
Our investigations also raised questions about the effects of Seroxat on under-18s.
Among the most disturbing patient reports we received were 23 about children who'd had a terrible time on the drug. Seroxat has not been approved as safe for use in under-18s, but doctors are allowed to prescribe it to them if they think it may help them.
And I'll just put the point to my arms and just scrape into the blood. I did attempt suicide a couple of times by taking overdoses and slitting my wrists.
We reported the findings of the biggest ever trial of children funded by Glaxo. They found that some depressed children suffered serious psychiatric problems soon after starting to take Seroxat.
Don't you think parents would be worried about that if their child was to be given this drug?
I think what parents would be more worried about is the risk that their children have of committing suicide and other symptoms and of severe depression if no treatment was available. I think parents would want treatments to be properly evaluated during clinical trials before their children are given any medicine.
The evidence here suggests that their children might be at more risk of suicide if they go on Seroxat.
No, the evidence is not there. There is no statistical difference between the groups. The reality of the situation is that in this trial, Seroxat was generally well tolerated by this difficult to treat population.
A month ago, the drugs regulator issued immediate warnings to GPs that they should no longer prescribe Seroxat to under-18s with depression. Having now examined Glaxo's data, the regulator concluded that Seroxat increases the risk of self-harm and suicidal thoughts.
This increase is small. It's rather similar to, if you imagine a school of more than 1,000 children, all of whom are deeply troubled by depression, less than a small class size would have these suicidal thoughts or attempts. So it's a small but important signal, and it's only when we've been able to pull together all the different pieces, all the different trials that make up this picture, that has enabled us to pull this together and provide this important safety information to the agencies.
Do you regret what you said last October? Because it probably led to more children being prescribed this drug.
No, I don't regret that at all. Seroxat does not have a license for use in children.
But it's prescribed to children, and doctors might have been reassured by what you told the programme.
Doctors, I'm sure, have an independent mind and will look at the data that is available.
There also remain unanswered questions about Seroxat's effects on adults, even though it has helped millions. The regulator and GlaxoSmithKline insist the drug's benefits outweigh the risks.
When you consider all the reports that have come from adults who say they felt like self-harming or felt suicidal, or there's actually been completed suicides after starting on Seroxat, I think people are very interested to know what you think the cut-off age might be.
Well, all I can do is driven by the data. We have done clinical trials in 18 and above, and there is no increased risk of suicidal thoughts or suicide attempts. And let's not forget that Seroxat is a medicine that in adults has benefited countless millions of people around the world.
Finally, Panorama reported from around the world before and during the war in Iraq. Here at home, the build-up to the war was marked by deep misgivings across the country, as Vivian White reported. In the United States, Steve Bradshaw spent time with the neocons, the backroom thinkers who helped shape President Bush's Middle East policy. And we reported from Iraq. Jane Corbin joined the UN weapons inspectors on their final journey to hunt for the weapons Saddam's regime insisted they'd already destroyed.
There was an air of anticipation, but also a big question mark hanging over their mission. Would they be able to prevent a war, or would they just delay it?
How are you feeling about it?
Excited, but also nervous. I think that if we can go to the places that we need to go to do the things we need to do, that we can help maybe prevent a war.
But President Bush and Tony Blair said Saddam had run out of time to hand over his weapons of mass destruction. Yet now that not a single weapon has been discovered, the President and the Prime Minister say they need more time to find them. The last word goes to the UN's Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix, who wanted more time but didn't get it. He's just spoken to Jane Corbin on his last day in office.
Do you think the real agenda, particularly from the American government, but also the British government, was that this was a war that they wanted, and so therefore they read the intelligence accordingly?
I think there was an element of that. The main justification, after all, which we were told, and what the American people were told, and the United Nations was told, was weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, I think that the case they ought to be able to rest it on that case. And if that basis sort of crumbles, or becomes shaky at any rate, well, I think that's a serious matter.
The US and British governments told us repeatedly it is in imminent danger.
Yes.
And therefore we should go to war.
Yes. I mean, the British document and dossier already last autumn of 2002 spoke about 45 minutes. I read it the other day. So that was not a new figure. It was already in the autumn of 2002. And that is highly doubtful.
Highly doubtful. You haven't changed your mind on that?
No.
So how do you feel now that the British government was prepared to put that information into the public domain and use it to generate a feeling amongst the public that this was an imminent danger?
Well, before you accuse anybody, I think you have to see the subjective side of it. were they aware that this was not valid? I mean, I had several conversations with Tony Blair, and my definite impression was that he was convinced, subjectively convinced, that they had weapons of mass destruction. He was not fooling me at all. But the analysis of it, the examination of it that had been made by his staff or himself, he had had time, was not sufficiently critical.
Not sufficiently critical.
No.
Panorama returns in the autumn. By then, Jane Corbin will have returned from Iraq with the results of her investigation into whether Mr. Blair's reasons for going to war were built on sand. Also in the autumn, from John Simpson, the friendly fire incident in northern Iraq that killed at least 16 people, including the BBC translator, and nearly killed John and his Panorama producer.
Right. Hey! We're coming back! It's coming back.
Panorama returns in 10 days' time with a special midweek program. Our 6 months undercover investigation shows just how chaotic our asylum system has become. And if you have stories you want Panorama to investigate,